The war is on. This is a tweet from Trabzonspor's official account from April 3rd, 2024. And this is how Trabzonspor started their most recent match against Konyaspor on that same day. I believe that's a 0-11-0 formation, as they're effectively utilizing the keeper as an outfield player in this shape, arms locked in protest. With reactions such as these both on the pitch and off of it, you would expect to hear that some sort of catastrophic punishment was placed upon Trabzonspor. But that's not the case, as they are more enraged that there wasn't a heftier punishment placed upon their hated rivals Fenerbahçe. They're seemingly more angry about the lack of punishment for them than they are about the punishment that was actually placed upon themselves. I'm sure I don't need to remind you, but this is all in the fallout of the post-match scenes from Fenerbahçe defeating Trabzonspor a few weeks ago, where Trabzonspor supporters invaded the pitch to attack Fenerbahçe players after 90 minutes of throwing projectiles and flares onto the pitch. I did an entire video on those events, breaking it down and getting into the historical context of it all, so check it out if you want. And 13 people have been arrested following those events. A lot has happened since then as well, including an April 1st post from Trabzonspor that was indeed serious, and how they have tried to twist the narrative to be seen as the victims in this situation. Let's go over the broad strokes to get you updated on what's happened in Turkish football in the days that followed that last video. Let's start by updating Fenerbahçe, who I mentioned in the previous video would call on a General Assembly to decide their course of action in light of the events in Trabzon. Well, that assembly happened on April 2nd, and it looked like a football match with the atmosphere there in the stadium, as you can see for yourself. In the build-up to this, Fenerbahçe maintained that they would be taking radical action. Ali Koç had been speaking regularly to the media, saying that they had a range of roads that they could go down in response to what was, at that point, inaction from the Turkish Football Federation, or TFF. He also said that he suspects that through their inaction, the TFF is essentially waiting for a disaster to happen before they take things seriously. No members from TFF decried the events, or even commented on them at all. On the day of the assembly, they released a video on their official social media channels that detailed all of the ways that they felt they had been wronged since the turn of the century. You know, to stoke the fires a little bit. At the General Assembly, they had the words "fair competition" written below those who were on the stage, a picture of Ataturk in the style of some wartime propaganda, and those who attended said there was a general, pun intended, air of us against the world in the crowd. Now, in order for a vote to pass, they need to have the majority of their members present, so 50% plus one will do it, and on this night, there were 30,000 of their 45,174 members in attendance for the vote, so they definitely had more than 50%. What did they decide to do? Well, in my previous video, I got the translation wrong a little bit, but the sentiment was still the same. They could vote to do nothing, or they could vote to go as far as giving Chairman Ali Koç the right to dissolve their football department of the club, thus leaving the Super Lig. The overall outcome, however, first of all, they aren't withdrawing from the league just yet, as they deferred that decision to 3 months down the road and will finish the current season first, then make that decision at the next General Assembly. On top of that, the 4 motions that they approved via the vote were to not participate in the Super Cup match or participate with the U19 team if it is not postponed to a suitable date and a foreign referee is not appointed. Number 2, to not participate in the Turkish Cup for the next 2 seasons or to participate with the U19 team. Number 3, to start international football structuring and organization independently of the decisions on football activities in Turkey. And number 4, to apply to the relevant committees of UEFA and FIFA regarding the incidents experienced. With a bonus vote saying that everyone watching this video should make sure they are subscribed to Rabona TV, because only about half of you who watch are subscribed. At least I think that's what it said. Again, it could be a translation error. Now, in regard to number 3, that's due to Koç saying that they could either get relegated to a lower league in Turkey, or they would perhaps look to set up their organization in a foreign league, perhaps acquiring another club as a sort of puppet club for Fenerbahçe. Now, 24 hours after all of this, Fenerbahçe had a match against Adana Demirspor, the team of Mario Balotelli. They won that match 4-2. Balotelli did score. But the more notable thing was Serdar Dursun doing a Siu celebration a total of 4 times after he scored for Fenerbahçe's 4th goal. That's a high Siu to goal scored ratio, isn't it? But in all seriousness, Fenerbahçe had the words fair competition written on the field for this match, something I'm actually kind of surprised was allowed to go forward. Not because I care about it at all, but typically leagues are very, very stringent when it comes to any sort of messages, religious or otherwise, to be displayed by players or clubs. And given the heat that Fenerbahçe had been putting on the TFF, you'd think that they'd do everything to stop the message from being painted on the pitch. We'll see if Fenerbahçe are punished retroactively for it. Speaking of punishments, prior to announcing what kind of punishment that Trabzonspor would face for their fans invading the pitch and attacking the Fenerbahçe players, they first announced which players would be referred to the disciplinary board for punishment, basically to decide the length of their punishments. Fenerbahçe had 2 players in the list, Oosterwolde and Egrabayat, the latter of which was a substitute in that match but partook in the calamity after it. Oosterwolde kicked a pitch invader while they were down, which is cowardly. I understand that the fan shouldn't have been there in the first place, but he was already pinned down by security. Like, why go over there and kick him in the head? Coward move. As for Trabzonspor, they didn't have any players up for disciplinary action, but their trainer, Egemen Korkmaz, who did also attack Fener players, was indeed considered for disciplinary action. Before the actual punishments had even been dealt out, Trabzonspor responded with a press statement highlighting that Osayi Samuel didn't receive any kind of punishment whatsoever. In their statement, Trabzonspor wrote, "The referrals made to the Professional Football Discipline Committee by the Turkish Football Federation are the proof that fear, being crushed under pressure, and the feeling of shame have disappeared and also represent the peak of immorality." Ignoring the attack on our fans by Fenerbahçe's 2 footballers, Osayi Samuel and Jadon Oosterwolde, in front of millions of people as if it never happened, the TFF has, by referring these players not for this act but for the crime of getting involved in a fight to the PFDK, ensured that they receive lighter penalties. The TFF has also endorsed another act of illegality by deciding that there was no need to refer Mert Mulder and Michy Batshuayi, who kicked our fans, thus legitimizing and even encouraging violence on the pitch by a professional player in Turkey. They also demanded that TFF all resign, which is quite the demand, you gotta say. It should be noted that the fan that the aforementioned Batshuayi attempted to kick with a spin kick and missed is the same fan that went on to punch Dominik Livakovic in the melee. On top of that, I am guessing that they deemed Osayi Samuel's punches on pitch invaders were done in self-defense, as he was in one case attacking the invader that first ran on and raised his fists to the players, then stopping another invader that was coming to attack another official or player. Who knows? He was stopped before he could do so. So that's what I assume the ruling was surrounding him, but that's simply speculation on my part. Now, in the end, Oosterwolde and Egrabayat were given 1 match bans, as was Korkmaz, the trainer from Trabzonspor. But on top of that, Trabzonspor was given a 6-match stadium ban for the inability to control their supporters, as well as a 3 million Turkish lira fine, which equals about 87,000 euros. Fenerbahçe's Ali Koç had spoken about the lack of security in the lead up to the punishment announcements, where he alleged that it was deliberate to not have the ample amount of security provisions at this match. That's his allegation. Based on what I saw of the match versus other heated matches in Turkey, there was certainly a lack of police presence to control the crowd. And honestly, they were lucky with how things played out, as it wasn't far from a potential disaster. It's a deadly risk to make this a regular thing, as we have seen some terrible situations unfold due to fan misbehavior in Indonesia about a year and a half ago. So they need to get this under wraps in the Turkish Super Lig. Now, before I kind of weigh in on Trabzonspor's reaction to everything, well, we gotta hear what their reaction actually was, right? Now, you saw a glimpse of it in the intro to this video. As mentioned, before the punishments were even announced for the players that were offered to the disciplinary committee, Trabzonspor released that statement asking for TFF board to resign and highlighting that more Fenerbahçe players should be punished. And so once the punishments were dished out, that's when we saw their next reaction. F your justice, leave your positions, resign. This statement, of course, echoing what they had said in their previous statement on April 1st, but it wasn't a gotcha April Fool's joke. They echoed that they want the TFF to resign. Starting with Mehmet Büyükekşi, the president of the TFF. If you ask me, considering there were about 13 arrests, 5 of which are still in custody, and about 90 or so people made it onto the pitch to try to attack Fenerbahçe players, I'd say that 6 matches without fans and a slap on the wrist kind of fine isn't that harsh of a punishment, all things considered. But they showed their displeasure on the pitch as well, standing arm in arm, refusing to play at the beginning of their match against Konyaspor. Konyaspor saw what they were doing and began passing the ball around. Just imagine if they bolted forward and just put one in the empty net. With how they and some ally fans, those being mainly Galatasaray supporters, have responded to this, it's all a bit silly to me. It's all just typical whataboutism, the kind of arguments that you see on social media all the time, which is one of the many reasons why Twitter has become so boring. There's a reason why I barely have a presence on there beyond some retweets. It's all what about. With all of the arguments that are made by both Trabzonspor, some of their supporters, and other Fenerbahçe rivals, it feels as if they are incredibly keen to look past the main big event that is at the heart of all of this. Trabzonspor supporters lobbing things onto the pitch all match, a match that would have been abandoned in many other countries, and then supporters rushing the pitch to attack Fenerbahçe players. That in itself is the main thing that should be focused on, and yet they are trying to spin the narrative so that there is more focus on how the Fenerbahçe players reacted to the attack, rather than the colossal, embarrassing, and honestly shameful failure that is the supporters breaching security and attacking opposition players. It's ridiculous. They're taking the symptoms, which I am not excusing Oosterwolde, by the way, and his actions, but they are taking some of the symptoms of the disease, if you will, and using that to try to distract and play victim in all of this. And it's not fooling anybody, really, except for maybe the Galatasaray supporters who happen to agree with them and want to see Fenerbahçe players suspended because A, they are their biggest rivals, and B, they are title competitors this season. By the way, not all Galatasaray supporters agree with Trabzonspor supporters, just the more radical of such. And so this decision from Trabzonspor to focus almost entirely on what the Fenerbahçe players did once fans began running onto the pitch and saying that the punishment is unjust, instead of addressing their own wrongs and their failures, all just comes off as very disingenuous, wanting punishment for the reaction to something without acknowledging the root cause of it, and how none of this would have happened if they had controlled their supporters and had the proper security measures on hand. They double down by saying that the TFF should resign, a drastic stance similar to what Fenerbahçe was doing with their drastic threats to leave. Why do this? To me, it seems to try to further paint a picture of wrongdoing, hoping the outside world just sees their statements and doesn't look further into the actual incident and what the root of this situation is. They may cry a foul to other past controversies involving Fenerbahçe as well, to once again distract from the issue at hand here. It's all pretty transparent. You can see through their tactics, but hey, they're giving it a go, you know? On the other side, you have Fenerbahçe feeling like the victims as well, which they absolutely are in this situation in particular, and pointing to all of the ways they have been wronged in the past. A lot of the supporters feel as though the entire Turkish government, I'm talking outside of football here, the actual government has been trying to squash Fenerbahçe due to them not supporting Erdogan's regime, for the president of Fenerbahçe being in support of certain protests against the government, and more. They also point to the fact that it is curious to see that nobody from the TFF or even the government commented on the situation to condemn it, as they had done when the referee was attacked, for example, which is pretty curious indeed. There was widespread condemnation from TFF. And so each side is at war at the moment to seem like more of the victim in this case, and it isn't showing any signs of letting up. So we'll see what happens going forward. Fenerbahçe are already appealing the bans for their players, and that's why they were still eligible to play against Adana Demirspor, while Trabzonspor's media and PR team will surely continue their campaign to try to convince the hearts and minds of the world that they are, in fact, the victims in all of this. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, I just have one request for you. Drop a like for me. That tells their algorithm that it's worthy of being seen by others. But beyond that, thanks again. I'm Adrian, by the way, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.